Hi everybody, this is Kim at Sassy Jack Stitchery and Yonder Ways, and I wanted to take some time and walk you through a flat finish ornament tutorial that I did earlier this year. I took pictures of all the different steps along the way and thought I would put it together with a voiceover, and maybe that would help you as you go to do some of your finishing. I do want to say right up front that I took all kinds of information and tips and tricks from lots of people who've helped me learn to finish over the years. So Vonna Pfeiffer, Faye Rigsby, Kathy Haberman of Hands On Design, Beth Sill of Summerhouse Stitchwork, Susan Greening Davis. So, and several other folks too that I didn't get mentioned in there, but it's a kind of it takes a village. so, so I appreciate all the help from those folks. And this is just kind of my mishmash of how I do it. And there are many other ways to do it, but I wanted to talk you through this one because it turned out kind of pretty. So the pattern is from a 1741 Saxon sampler that we have in the collection of Sassafras samplers. And if you don't know, we actually do and have been doing since 2017, 2018, sampler reproductions, and we also do some original design. And this one came from a really beautiful Saxon sampler that we call the AEH 1741 Saxon. And it is due to be published sometime very, very soon. So keep your eye out for that. It's just a tip that you can pull things from all kinds of different sources. So if you have some sampler books, and maybe you do, you can just pull a motif from there and you can make something beautiful with it. You don't have to always stitch the whole thing. So just wanted to share that with you. And the only change I made to this beautiful deer, this stag, is that I made the little ball right there under his antler red and made a little string that goes up to attach it. There was actually kind of a little ball there on the original antique, and it was a different color. And so I actually just turned it to red that I knew I could match a ribbon to for trim, and it would look beautiful for Christmas, and did that. And so the other things that I used here were a 32 count Dove Zweigart base linen from Week Style Works for the front, and a Lady Dot vintage pom-pom trim, and then a Tim Holtz velvet ribbon for the hanger. And then when you get to the back, which we'll look at now, what you'll see is that I actually used a different color linen on the back. I used a Week Style Works Zweigart base beige. And then I just took a little bitty piece of the cutoff linen from the design on the front, and I stitched my name and date on it and a little nun stitch, and I attached that to the back, and I'm going to show you how I did that too. Now, the other thing that's inside of this are two pre-cut circles on a mat board. And so you can, an acid-free mat board, so you can cut your own circles out using a template, or you can buy some pre-made circle cutouts. I actually really like to use the ones from Kathy Haberman at Hands On Design that she did for one of her other creations. But there's 3 sizes of circles in there. You can find it on our website. I'll put a little link underneath this for you, and I use them all the time for finishing. I'm very greedy with those. It keeps me from having to cut anything new out, but I love them. It's kind of a little secret. So if you're going to be making some ornaments and they're circular, that might be the way to go. And then I use linen thread to do some lacing with it, and I used a 103 silk thread to couch on the pom-poms. And then the only other thing that I used was some very lightweight fusible interfacing. And so let's talk through what I did. The first thing I did was iron my piece, and I ironed it on a wool mat. You can iron it on your ironing board. Just make sure that when you iron it, you face the piece down. If you've got any kind of dimensional stitching on the front of it, make sure that you've got like a soft towel or something underneath it, and you know that you're using a no steam iron, because if you have used any kind of overdyed threads in there, you don't want to cause any bleeding. So I would use some no steam iron. And if you need to get some wrinkles out, you can use some best press spritzing, but just be real, kind of cautious with that. Make sure that you're not going to get any bleeding from that by testing it on the side. So I ironed it, and then I ironed a piece of fusible interfacing to the back just to cover the design. And then I cut it out. So I cut a big circle out. If you look, you'll see that I've got that circle cardboard behind it. I made sure that I cut, like an extra inch around it to fit around that circle, and that I had plenty of linen there to draw it in. And you can kind of see already what I'm getting ready to do. I took my linen thread, which is a Londonderry 50/3 linen thread, and you can use it in any color, but I like to use this kind of natural or off-white color to do all my lacing and finishing with. And so if you buy yourself a spool of that, it'll go a real long way, and you can do what you need to. A lot of people, including the professionals in the industry, of which I am not a professional finisher, use an upholstery thread. They really like using a heavyweight upholstery thread, and you can get that at your big box shop. We'll probably have some of it in the shop here too eventually. So if you want to finish with that, you can certainly do that. What I don't recommend is that you try to finish with floss. Floss is just not strong enough. You're going to end up breaking it and causing yourself a lot of frustration. So once you get your piece cut out with about an inch, around where the circle is, you want to go through and do an over-under basting stitch. And it doesn't really matter where you start it. And it doesn't matter, how many threads you're going over under. You just want it to kind of be kind of even. And you don't need to count that. You're just going over under. So you can see I came in about 1/4 of an inch. You can come in a little bit more if you want to, if you need to make sure you're, if you've got a real delicate linen or something like that, you don't want to, pull too hard or whatever, come in a little bit more, like if you had a really loose weave or something. But this was plenty for me, and this is what I usually do. So you kind of see that process there. I do that looking at the front so that I know that that deer is kind of centered in the middle. And now if we look at the next picture, you can see that I have 2 strings coming up, one that has a knot and one that's still on the needle. So you want to, don't cut your strings. You want to make sure you use a long string to get all the way around it. And it'd be great if you could use a long enough string that you have some to use to lace the back, which is going to come next. So you see I've got it laying right next to that circle to make sure that everything is going to fit. And now here, there's a couple different ways you can do this. I have laid it good side out. So the back of the stitching is facing the cardboard or the acid-free mat board circle. It's not cardboard, it's acid-free mat board. You can put a warm and natural batting in there or another batting of your choice. And you just want to give some softness to the linen. You don't want it to be right up against that acid-free cardstock or mat board, because it's going to not have as nice a feel or a look to it. And I did not have any batting at that time, and so I used some polyfill, which you can also do. You can see polyfill gets a little wild there. You have to tuck it in and stuff, but it's not a big deal. So if you've got a whole bunch of polyfill, you can use that. You're not making a pincushion, so you don't have to worry too much. You're not going to put much under there. You just want it to be soft. But if you have batting is probably the way to go. And then I pulled it tight. And so if you look at the next picture, you see me pulling it tight. And I'm going to be tucking it in around there and making sure that my drawn linen is coming over the edge of that circle. So now here you see that I've gotten it all in there and I've gotten it pulled pretty tight. I've got the 2 ends in my fingers there. I'm still working on top of that wool mat. And you can see in the background I have another circle. So you need 2 to actually do this. One for the front and one for the back. So once you get that drawn, you actually want to flip it over before you tie anything off. And you want to make sure that your ornament is pretty well centered, that you're happy with how that looks. This is the right time to shift that around if you need to. You can do it after you've laced the back, which we haven't done yet, but it's much easier to do it if you've got a lot of room. If you've got a lot of movement that you need to make, it's much easier to do it here. And so you can see I'm pretty well centered there. I think I did shift him a little bit here and there to get him where I wanted him. Then I turn it back over and I tie a knot. I tied a couple of knots there because I wanted it to be good and tight. And you can see how the linen pulled up around it. You can see I had a little more linen to get him centered on one side than the other. And so that's why you want to leave, at least an inch around the design so that you have room to shift it around if you need to get it centered better. So right now, I still have 2 threads up there, one that's in a needle and one that's not. And so I flip him back over. I look at the front and he looks great to me. I'm happy with that. Okay. And so now I go back to the back again. You're getting whiplash here. But now I want to start lacing. And so this is important. If you did end your thread, you need to rethread your needle. And I'm still using the Londonderry linen thread, the 50 weight. I rethread the needle. If you need to, I still had thread left, so I used what I had. And you just want to start anywhere you've got those little puckers. Because if you remember on the front, the circle just did not look exactly smooth all the way around. It actually had some little pointy parts, and that's where the puckers are. And so what you're trying to do with this lacing is just smooth down the edges of the circle as much as you can. And the way to do that is to catch those puckers on the back. And so I lace in a star shape, which is what a lot of people do. And you can start to see me lacing here. You can go back and forth and up and down, but you really kind of, in the end, you want to start hitting it in a star shape so that you're drawing in all of those little puckers. So you're going from one side to the other and back and forth in kind of a star shape there. Okay, so here you can see the star shape a little bit better. You can see, me drawing that together. I'm trying to, you can sort of see I'm hitting every big pucker and trying to pull that down, and you're lacing it pretty tight. So once you get all of that done, you tie it off. And so when you get it all laced, you tie it off. And how you tie it off is you go through, one of those little puckers or a little piece of the linen. You go through it once, and then before you pull it tight, you slide your needle back through the loop, and then you pull it tight. And then I usually do that at least twice, if not 3 times, in the same spot. You don't want to make a hole in your linen, but you come up through the linen like in a sewing motion. You leave your little loop of your thread behind you, and then you take your needle, you put it through that loop, and then you pull it tight. So that gives you a good finished knot, and then you can cut it off. Okay, so now here I am getting ready to make the back. And I do the back the exact same way to cover it. So I just want to show you kind of what it looks like there. And then I'm picking out the ribbon before I get ready to make the back because there's something else I want to do to that back. So I'm just kind of showing you here how it flattens down. And so then I had this little spool of different ribbons that I had picked up at a big box shop. And I laid them beside that little ornament, and I picked out the one that I liked, which was the deep red. And so I cut enough of the ribbon to make my hanger out of, because I'm going to have to attach that in the center as I join the pieces together. Now on the back, I actually wanted to put that little scrap fabric that had my name on it and the date. And so you can see here I've got a cutout of the linen that was left over from the front. And so you can see how I cut my circle. I just cut straight into it, and then I cut around. To do that, I laid my acid-free circle on top and cut about 1 inch out from that all the way around. It didn't have to be perfect because you saw how we finished it. We're just pulling it tight. So I wanted to use a little scrap of that dove blue to sew my name and my date, and then I wanted to attach it to the back. So in this picture, you see how I did that. I just cut a little piece off. I stretched it over a tiny 4-inch hoop, and of course it's not going to stretch on all 4 sides, but that's okay. And then I stitched my name, and I just kind of made it work like I wanted it to. I wanted it to be relatively small. And then I did an unstitch. And so you see, to do the unstitch, I pull a thread there before I cut it out, just to make sure that I don't cut my stitches. So there's lots of little tutorials and diagrams out there to show you how to do an unstitch. So I won't go through that here, but if you ever need me to show you, let me know. I'm happy to do that. So I did an unstitch around the edges, which means that you don't have to do anything else to it. You can just do that little unstitch, and then you can clip right up to it, and it will not ravel. It's kind of like putting an overlock or a zigzag stitch in. It binds the edge of the linen, and you don't have to worry about it raveling out. But before you cut it, to make sure that you don't cut the threads that you stitched with, you really want to pull a thread, and that's what those little threads are around there. I've pulled those threads so that I have a little channel that I can cut in, and that is the next thing I did. I cut out the little square, and got that little initials done for me to attach to the back. Okay. Okay. And so, okay. So in the next picture, you can see that okay. So how did I attach that to the back? I actually laid the little cutout on top of the piece of linen that I wanted to use for the back, which was the beige, the 32 count beige. And then I just went over the red nun stitch again. I basically just tacked it down. Just went with a back stitch, or you could use a running stitch, but a back stitch would be more consistent. And I just went over the inside square of that nun stitch. I didn't do the legs, but I did the inside square. And I just tacked it on to the piece of linen that I wanted to use for the back. And then when I put the back together, I made sure to center that, or to put it where I wanted, which for me was kind of close to center, kind of toward the bottom, just a smidge. And so I made sure to get that in the right spot. Now we're getting ready to put the two pieces together and bind them together. And to do that, I used, again, the Londonderry linen thread, and I just did a whip stitch. I made sure that I had them positioned correctly so that I had where I wanted, where my name was going to be right side up, and that the deer, relative to the deer on the front, and that I whip stitched through the ribbon that is the hanger. Now, how I did that is I whip stitch all around it, and you can see they're pretty tiny little stitches. They're not uniform, and it won't matter because you can't see it once we put the trim on it. But when I got to the ribbon, of course you can't whip stitch it. I went in and out. So I poked and stabbed through that ribbon as I went by it or over it, from the front to the back, from the back to the front, from the front to the back, from the back to the front. And I stitched through that ribbon really good to make sure that it is not going to pull out over time. And so that's how I got through the ribbon. When I whip stitched these two pieces together, I did not start at the top, because that's a bad place to start because you've got your hanger there. You should start on the side or on the bottom. It will not matter because you won't be able to see it. You just don't want to start it where you've got to attach that hanger. And so I just whip stitch it together. I held it pretty tight. You can see the amount of polyfill that I put in there is pretty minimal. I squeezed it down really tight. I just wanted it to be soft. I didn't want it to be thick like a drum or anything. And so this is what it looks like at this stage. The front and the back are together. The ribbon hanger is in there. I've put it in the spot that I wanted it. You really want to make sure that when you put that ribbon hanger in there, that your two ends of it are matched up together. A trick to that is you can put a little tacking stitch in there to hold them together before you insert it into your ornament. So, it doesn't look good if they're kind of pushed apart like in a V shape before you even get them attached. You really want them to come out of kind of the belly of the ornament together. And so if you want to make sure that you get them together, do just a little tacking stitch on them before you put it into the ribbon, and then that'll kind of hold it together for you. And as you stitch it in there, you'll have them coming out, the two legs together. So it's whip stitched together, and it's ready for the next thing. This is what the back looks like at this point. And now, so if you use a pom-pom, you could use chenille, or you could use pom-pom, or you could use whatever. Or, in this case, honestly, it was neat enough that I didn't have to put anything on the edge, and it would have been fine, but it just adds a little softness to it. But when you use pom-poms, especially those from Lady Dot, and they're great, you can separate out that silk edging from the poms. So the silk edging is there if you're going to sew it into something as you go. And if you don't do that, which is kind of hard to do on a round ornament, it's good to do it that way if you're making like a pillow or something. You can just sew it in there as you go, as you sew the two pieces together. But for something like this, you're really couching it to the top. And couching means that you are laying it on the surface and you're using another thread to tack it down. And so to do that, you really don't want that silk edge on there. And you can just separate it. So all you have to do is take the end of it and start to just pull them apart, and you kind of clip it a little bit as you go. And if you clip it, you'll start to see that it'll ravel apart, and you end up with the silk binding on one side and the palms on the other. And then you can just go through, and if you've got any of the leftover silk, little threads, remnants, whiskers, just pull those out of your palms. And then you've got a nice, beautiful piece of palm that you can just couch onto your ornament. And I do believe that Lois from Lady Dot has a little instruction out on her website, and I will link to that below, that you can go and see how she recommends that you separate the palms from the little binding in order to do this next step. So here you see you've got the palms. They're beautiful. They don't have any of that silk ribbon. They match everything well, accent it well, and they're ready to get attached. Now this is where I switched over to a 103 silk that matches my palms. So you can go two ways with couching. You can match the linen underneath, or you can match the thing that you're couching. And generally, I like to match the thing that I'm couching and make tiny stitches so that you can't see it. And they basically just disappear in there. Now, if you're really looking for them, you'll see them. But other than that, they just disappear. And so I use a Vera Soie 103 silk that matched my pom-poms. And I think I used a single strand for that. And I just tacked them down. And so how I did that is I started with a knot, and I came up in between the seams of the ornament and buried the knot. And so I tied kind of a big knot to it. I put it in with my needle below where I really wanted to start, and I came back out maybe an inch or two somewhere else, and that knot held me in there firm. And then I laid my pom-pom down, and I came from under the pom-pom. I went over the pom-pom between the two palms and back into the linen. And then I shifted that needle down underneath and came back up at the next palm and went back down. Now, you don't have to do between every palm. It takes a while to do that, but it keeps it a lot more firm. But you definitely want to do every 2 or 3 little palms. But if you do every palm, then it'll just keep it on there even better. It'll look seamless. But, feel free to skip to every 2 or 3 if you need to do that. So that's how I attached it. And it takes a little time, but it just looked really pretty. You can see here's the finished product. The palms are on there. They're kind of subtle, but they make it look finished. This is the back, same way. Now, the place to start those palms, usually you start at the bottom. You can start it on the side, but you usually start it at the bottom, especially if you're doing an ornament, because it'll be hanging on a tree. The person won't be looking up at it from the bottom unless they're a wee little one, and they'll be absorbed just by the beauty of the tree. They won't be looking at your needlework. But most people will be looking at it from the front, the top, and you always want to have a finished back to your ornament too, just because you can see the backs of ornaments from trees when you're walking around the tree and stuff. So it's always nice to have a finished back too, which this one is. And you start the palm at the bottom, you tack it down or couch it down all the way around. And you usually, when you get to that hanger, you can go in front or in back. I went in front on mine. And normally I think that looks good because it looks seamless from the front. And so I go in front of the hanger as I go around the hanger, and then I come back down, and on the bottom, I just tack it down again. It's great if you can make them, with very little overlap. Just get them joined up there and tack them down, and they just look fantastic that way. So that's how I did it. I hope that you enjoyed the little walkthrough. I will put some links underneath for some of the things that I used to do it. And I hope that this will help you finish something this year. It was super easy. It really didn't take that long. And I had pretty much everything I needed to do it right in front of me. It's always good to keep a little stash of finishing things. So as you're walking through little shops and stuff and you see pretty little pieces of velvet or palms or whatever, snatch those up and just put them in a little box for finishing. And then, of course, it's always nice to incorporate a piece of what you're doing back into it for your name and stuff. So I like to do that little patch on the back that has the name and the date. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful, and I will see you again soon. Bye.